trying to figure out what 9 Inch Nails is going to be about. It was someone that was vitally important to me. It was a huge inspiration. And it is with great pleasure and honor I present to you Gary Numan.
It's an amazing thing to go through. Every day I'm getting more and more famous and I'm becoming this massive pop star. It just, the whole world just suddenly seems to be opening up.
He came up with a whole unique idea. The whole sound was pushed into that area, which was exactly where it needed to be at that time.
3 albums at the top 20 at the same time, 2 pairs of singles and albums #1 at the same time in the UK, #1 records all around the world. It was a fantastic roller coaster ride and it hit astonishing peaks.
There are few artists that can really claim to be a pioneer. Adored by his fans and vilified by the press, electropop forerunner Gary Numan burst into the charts in 1979, changing the face of popular music forever and going on to become one of the most sampled, covered and influential acts of the last 30 years. This is the story of the highs, the lows and his reinvention.
We wanted to hate him. You know, we'd been grafting away writing songs since we were 16. We were like, where did he come from?
It was music that I'd never heard before because it had a darkness and an iciness to it. I was almost afraid to like it.
This unique new sound evolved from the unlikeliest of places. Gary's career began against the backdrop of the London punk scene of 1979, where the fledgling artist and his band Tubeway Army were signed to emerging record label Beggars Banquet.
I've been signed by Beggars as a little 3-piece punk band and went to the studio to do that, give them their punk album, and that's when I found the synthesizers. And it sounds great, and that was me done, really. That was probably me done for the rest of my life in many respects. And it gave me that sense of direction, I suppose, sense of purpose that I hadn't really had before. So it's really lucky that I found it the first morning of my first ever day of recording my first ever album. You know, very lucky. And I hadn't really wanted to do punk anyway, but I'd done that to get the contract. And so I had to convert the songs very quickly from, you know, guitar type things into synthy type things. It's a quirky little thing, you know. I don't think it's the best piece of music in the world, but it was very, very early days. You know, synthesizers were just becoming more common. Up until then, you know, they were quite hard to find. You went to a music shop and it's guitars and pianos and things like that, but you didn't see synthesizers. Brilliant. It felt as if you were just, if I just stumbled across something at just the right moment.
The electro slant to the Tubeway Army album would bring Gary to the attention of Radio 1 DJ John Peel, who began championing his music as Gary started work on his next album, Replicas.
Replicas, not all of it, but much of it was written as a keyboard album, written on piano, Down in the Park and Our Friends Electric and those sort of songs. They were all written on piano with the intention of, when I got to the studio, adding the electronics to them. So it was the first time I'd written songs with this electronic sort of future in mind. It was all based on little short stories that I've been writing about this future time, and it kind of had a theme to it, more thought about, more cohesive than the first one. Felt as if I was moving forward, and it did feel like it was a better album. Down in the
When Replicas was being recorded, I remember going down and hearing some early sessions, and it was already sounding pretty different then. I heard songs like Down in the Park then for the first time, which were obviously very, very different to anything on the first album. I'm very excited, quite frankly. But I think what I remember most clearly is they had like an extra 3 days at the end of the sessions in the studio in Portobello Road. And that was the first time I heard Our Friends Electric, and I don't think Our Friends existed in any form until they went into that studio. And when I heard Our Friends Electric, I said immediately, that's got to be a single. It's too long and it's not single shaped, but it's so great, it's got to be a single.
That song proved to be Gary's unlikely breakout hit, launching him into the charts and establishing his alienated persona in the public consciousness.
Changed my life, Our Friends Electric. Actually, 2 songs stuck together, a chorus of one and verse of another, and I couldn't think how to finish either of them, so I put them together by accident one day. There's even a bum note in there, which I thought sounded better than the note I'd written, so I kept it. And it does what it does and changes your whole life, so, you know, full marks for accidents.
It was an extraordinarily different sounding record. It was as different as Good Vibrations by the Beach Boys was, or A White Shade of Pale by Procol Harum when they were number 1. It just came out of nowhere. And I think it's one of the greatest number 1s ever because it's so completely original.
With his profile rising, Gary was invited to perform on both the Old Grey Whistle Test and Top of the Pops, an invitation that would prove pivotal in shaping the public's perception of Gary.
You know I hate to ask, but the friends electric only much broke down, and now I've no one to love.
Well, what was really unusual about those 2 TV shows was having them both together, because normally if you were a pop artist, you were on Top of the Pops, if you were a rock artist, you were on Whistle Test, and ne'er the twain should meet. But to do both of them and to do them both in the same week, and to do them with such a stylized presentation as Gary had conceptualized by this point, just hit the world.
There's nothing about us.
Gary's innovation was not just confined to his unique sound. The carefully constructed image, at odds with contemporary fashions, added to his appeal, leading his fans to emulate his fashions and makeup. The attention to presentation would prove to be a recurring theme in Gary's career, with a series of powerful and striking looks.
Remember I am human. Remember I feel just like you.
I would say that he based himself on a sort of a David Bowie persona, as we all did, but he took one of the sort of colder ones, and that fitted the music, and that was great.
Remember I could end all this.
Possibly one of the reasons why Gary hooked onto the kind of Our Friends Electric robotic angle for music was that it allowed him to present himself in a way where he didn't have to have a direct kind of star-fan interaction. He could play the Robot Man.
With both Our Friends Electric and Replicas #1 in the single and album charts, Gary returned to the studio. Being the sole creative force behind Tubeway Army, he opted to release this next album under his own name. The Pleasure Principle further experimented with synthesized sounds, pushing the electronic sound to the forefront and featuring the groundbreaking hit, Cars.
Cars, quickest song I ever wrote. Like 10 minutes from start to finish, including the lyrics, I think. Maybe 15 at the most. Been hugely successful for me. It's a really awkward song to actually perform, especially on TV, because all the singing happens in about the first 60, 90 seconds or so. Then you've got another minute and a half where you've got nothing to do but just try to look interesting, yeah? It's horrible. Horrible. I used to dread that moment.
With both Cars and The Pleasure Principle storming to #1, Gary was the biggest new act in the world. A UK tour was planned with a lavish light show and a prestigious opening night in the Glasgow Apollo, where Gary would make his first public appearance.
One of my most abiding memories of the whole Gary era was that first show in Glasgow, because we really didn't know what to expect, and we'd known that he'd had some big records. This was obviously, at this point, I think he had 3 albums in the top 20 at the same time, which is real Beatles stuff. I can't think of anyone that's actually had 3 albums in the top 20 at the same time. And because he'd never been out on the road, we didn't really have any idea of what his fans were going to be like and who was actually buying these records.
You're just a viewer, so cold and distant. Well, I've no intention of saying I love you.
Walking out on stage in Glasgow, emotionally you're all over the place. You're really frightened because it's a really big gig and you've never done anything like it before. I'd only done pubs, to empty pubs before. Nobody knew who we were. And all of a sudden you become successful, not through gigging but by records. So the next time you do it, I mean, the last gig I did before Glasgow was some little place in Acton. There was a massive fight and it all got stopped, just at a pub. So all a bit in at the deep end. So I was really frightened, but really thought the light show was special. So I was really proud of that. And the only thing I was really unsure about was me, whether I'd be able to be interesting enough to look at. And just not really knowing whether I could do it or not, because I'd never been in that position. I'd never been on a proper stage before with a proper audience. And I knew the press were hostile, so I knew there was going to be an awful lot of people waiting for me to make a mess of it.
Coming, as we had done, from playing in grotty little basement punk clubs, the production values on that tour were enormous. I mean, quite frankly, I'm sure one of the reasons why OMD supported Gary was because there was only 2 of us and a tape recorder, and we could be squeezed on in front of the curtain with this huge production behind it. It really worked. And audiences probably had never seen anything like it before.
And at the end of the show, we were all backstage. We said, OK, let's go back to the hotel now, shall we? And someone opened the stage door, and there was 1 million fans out there trying to get in. And somebody just pulled the door shut. What do we do now? So someone went and got a coach driver, got a coach right up to the stage door so you could actually go straight from the stage door into the coach. And we drove off down the street with all these fans hanging onto the windows. It was that moment, I think, that made us realise, including Gary, how big it was.
Over the next year, Gary Numan's star would continue to rise. 1980 saw Gary have further worldwide top 10 hits, #1 albums, and complete 2 sellout world tours, even managing to break the tough American market with Cars and The Pleasure Principle. Gary seemed unstoppable.
So I'm down to this. I'm down to walking on air.
I recorded 3 albums, I think, in less than 12 months, and it was all now becoming really successful. It's an amazing thing to go through that. It is unbelievably exciting, and the whole world just suddenly seems to be opening up, and every day I'm getting more and more famous, and the records are selling more, and our Fringe Electric's going to #1, and they stayed there for a month, and I'm becoming this massive pop star. I just thought it was easy. It seemed really, really easy.
This is not love. This is not even what the point of you.
But Gary's career would take a new twist, just as dramatic and unexpected as his rise. And he would face a series of critical, commercial and personal setbacks that would leave him at an all-time low.
The backlash against his success was so extreme.
The knives were out for him right from the start. Finally, it's like, maybe the press did manage to convince people that they weren't supposed to be listening to Gary Numan.
I'd run out of everything. I'd run out of optimism and ideas.
I've been there and seen it. I've been up and down.
Lost my own way on every level and was just desperate. And all of a sudden you're famous and everyone's talking to you and everyone knows who you are, and I'm didn't know what I was doing at all. And all of it was weird and uncomfortable. But having my personality and then moving into something like that very, very quickly, you don't really have any time to adapt to it. It's suddenly you're in a completely different world within a few weeks from what you had before. For someone like me, that would be really tricky. And you're going to react to it in all kinds of weird ways. And I think a lot of the stuff on Telecon is I think it describes it really well, to be honest, what I'm going through.
Telecon, Gary's third album, was released just a year after The Pleasure Principle. An even more electronic sound and the return of guitars to Gary's writing framed a lyrical isolation that demonstrated his struggle with his newfound fame.
We are glass. We are glass.
The Telecon, I was finding my feet a little bit by then compared to the first one, but still light years away from where I've got to. Musically, the album was a really good step forward from the one before, much bigger sounding. I was very happy with the sound of it. I was very happy with it. The Telecon will probably be one of my favourite albums from those early years. But it's the beginning of me becoming definitely paranoid and realising more than ever that I don't interact well with people and struggling with that.
This is not love. This is not even what the point of you.
Tracks from the album like I Die, You Die and We Are Glass also reflected Gary's difficult relationship with the press and the ongoing critical and personal hostility they displayed.
I don't know for sure why they picked on Gary Numan. I suspect that they possibly had the same attitude that we had initially, which was, who the hell is this bloke who suddenly got into electronic music? You know, where did he come from? We paid our dues. We were proper first wave. So where did he come from?
But because it was so artfully constructed, it was asking to be knocked down, I suppose, even though it was revolutionary and it changed the world of music. Well, not just for a period of time, but but forever, probably. I suppose it's a shame in a way that it wasn't recognised as being as groundbreaking as it was because people were too busy taking pot shots.
I hadn't enjoyed it at all. I hadn't really enjoyed great big chunks of the whole fame thing all around. And playing live, I hadn't really taken to too nervous, too much negative stuff written about it. When I wanted to get out of it, they made sense to me.
In early 1981, Gary announced his retirement from touring, shocking the music world and his ever-loyal fans. The stage was set for a spectacular farewell tour featuring Gary's largest light show to date.
We did 3 nights at Wembley to finish. Coming off the end of that last one, I thought even then I might have made a mistake, to be honest about it. But the thinking behind it was sound, you concentrate on the music. The touring was taking you out of the studio, so I wasn't spending enough time working on new stuff. Come out of the limelight a bit, back off, slow everything down, just try to understand where you are. In the very short time that I wasn't doing it, the amount of growing up that I did was as much as anything, realising that it really wasn't touring's fault. That wasn't the problem. The problem was in here, and I was blaming it on touring. And well, I'll get out of touring, and that would mean that this can happen. And that was all, not all actually, but some of that was flawed. It was just growing up, I think. don't regret the retirement thing, but I regret the way I went about it. Hurt me really, really badly.
The announcement would prove to be a turning point in Gary's career and heralded a downturn in his fortunes.
I think it's had a permanent effect. You know, I think it pretty much finished my career off in one fell swoop there.
This has been the greatest 2 years I've ever had in my life.
I think you get sucked into this whole pop star kind of life, really. I mean, it started to slide away. It's something to miss, and I did, and I just wanted to get that back again. Dance is probably the very early beginnings of me moving away from what I do best, really. And so you can track it. You can track from dance onwards, more and more saxophone, more girl singers coming in, and you begin to see my part of it coming out. I become really hung up about my lack of my musicianship and my singing. I did want to make the albums more musical, and I wanted the level of musicianship on them to go up, and I wanted them to be more varied. At that time, I didn't want to get stuck in one particular kind of music. I was still looking for sounds and styles and different ways of trying to do it.
You're my assassin, but you can't save the crime. One that's possessions of me and you, angry.
Over the next 3 years, Gary would continue to have hit singles such as She's Got Claws and Music for Chameleons, but his popularity was waning. In 1984, increasingly struggling with his musical direction and with his relationship with Beggar's Banquet fragmenting, Gary decided to set up his own label, Numan Records.
Well, we went with Berserker. That was the first album we put out on our own record label. We left Beggar's Banquet, Universal, after Warriors, and that was all a little bit unpleasant and disappointing. I'm going to do Berserker with a fairly naive approach to, or fairly naive belief, I guess, in what I could do with my own record label. I thought it was going to be easy. And then suddenly found out that there's this whole world of stuff I had no idea went on. So that was a big shock. And then with The Fury, it was still on the same label that wasn't that much wiser. And now it had an awful lot less money than it had the year or so before. So now we actually were struggling to do the things that we were learning that we needed to do. But we didn't really have the money anymore to do it because we'd blown most of it on Berserker.
My confession, this is the sound of fear and I'll fall down.
The press situation, in some respects, it got even worse because they didn't write about me anywhere near as much, which would seem like a good thing, but it's not actually. You know, I'd far rather I was in every magazine being slagged off than not in them at all, because being hated is much better than being ignored. Yeah.
I'm back and I'm proven. I'm back and I'm strong. And I've been waiting for so long now.
The ongoing financial pressures of running Numan Records were paralleled by Gary's creative frustrations. Critically panned and generating lackluster sales, the albums released under his own imprint demonstrated an artist losing his way.
All of that middle period feels difficult, and I just don't feel particularly positive or good about any of it, really.
One question, one answer. I don't need exposure. I don't know the slogan. New passion kills me.
I wasn't massively into the music, I wasn't massively into the way I looked, it's far from it, but it was all a million miles away from what I should have been doing. I kind of sensed that, but didn't do anything about it.
With financial pressures mounting and desperate to revisit his earlier success, Gary released 1992's Machine and Soul.
Worst of everything was Machine and Soul. Worst image, worst album, worst tour, worst selling, worst everything. I'd run out of everything. I run out of optimism and ideas. Didn't know how I wanted to sound, didn't know what I wanted to sing about. Lost my own way on every level. It sums up how life was at that particular time. Everything was like that. It was not the best time.
February 2010, and Gary is shooting the video for his new single, The Fall, as he continues to write new material.
Thank you, Gary.
A full single video is being done in a disused, run-down sanitarium in Lincoln. Brilliant place, actually, but quite scary. It's very, very creepy, but it's an amazing location.
Following the creative and critical failure of Machine and Soul, Gary's career had stalled completely. In 1992, he began dating Gemma O'Neill, a lifelong fan who would later become his wife and be pivotal in helping Gary re-examine his musical direction.
She worked really hard for a long time on why I made the albums that I've made over the years. You know, why didn't you play guitar on them anymore? Why didn't you play keyboards? And you know, why is your singing in the background and there's all girls everywhere? You know, why do you do that? And made me realise that you know, I might not be the best guitar player or keyboard player, and I might not be the best singer, but the way I play them and the way I sing and so on, for some people, that they do really like it, and so why not? I shouldn't be ashamed or embarrassed about it. I should enjoy the fact that, you know, you can do something in a certain way that other people really like. And she made me understand that at that point, and I hadn't really realised it before, but I'd been taking the Gary Numan part out of the albums more and more and more and more with each one, up until Machine and Soul. So when I went in to make Sacrifice, I didn't expect to get a contract with it. I didn't have a contract at the time. Massive doubts as to whether it'd ever be released. So it was really doing it for the love of it, you know, just doing it as a hobby, the way I had done when I was sort of 17 and 18, you know, and just did everything myself, you know. Wrote everything obviously, but played everything and produced it and engineered it and just did it all on my own. I really enjoyed it. You know, the music was very different to what I've been doing before. It was much heavier, much darker, and it felt very, very much as if I'd stumbled across that path that I was on years before. You know, there was, in my mind, I could see a straight line, like train tracks, straight back to Telecon and Replicas and those albums, and then in between you could just see these footsteps wandering off into the fog, yeah, and then bonk, and you're back on it and you find yourself again. I think that was the final part of the confidence coming, and I'm just feeling really at home with it. And from that moment on, really, from sort of mid-90s onwards, it's been complete, I suppose, the best way to put it. As far as I see my own ability to do it and perform it, I felt as if I know what I'm doing.
Having just found his feet again creatively, Gary was about to receive a welcome boost from a host of new artists from across the musical genres.
I always felt that Gary would be influential in the long term, but it took a long time to come.
Artists influenced by his unique electronic sound from over a decade before.
Gary is fantastically influential in a way that he just...
To be about writing songs for the love of writing those songs. Music was very different to what I've been doing before, and it felt very, very much as if I'd stumbled across that path that I was on years before. To walk out with 9 Inch Nails in a giant venue like that, doing 2 of my songs as it turned out, I didn't realise that until the day before. And as I walk out, the whole crowd just erupted from front to back. I don't know how to put it into words yet. It's just one of the best moments of my life. It's fantastic. You know, my favourite band, massive crowd, everyone screaming and singing my songs. It's fantastic.
And it's been an honor to be able to play some shows with him, and it felt great. You know, it felt good and seeing people surprised when he came out. And it was also great at sound check, hearing the right voice singing that song for a change and the right octave. You know, I was like, fuck. And we all looked at each other like, okay, you know, this is, wow, well, Gary Numan on stage, you know?
The rapturous reception to Gary's O2 London guest appearance prompted Trent to invite Gary over to LA for further on-stage spots.
Well, the LA shows with 9 Inch Nails were, in some respects, a double-edged sword, really, because these were the last shows they're ever going to do. And they were stopping playing live. From my point of view, you know, a brilliant band is finished, and there aren't that many around that we can afford to lose any. But to be invited to be a part of it, you know, and to share in it, and to be on stage with them again in those 4 final shows again was a real honour.
Hey man, I'll tell you, I'm not gonna fuck around. I get the honour of presenting to you Gary Numan, a good friend.
The crowds were great. The crowds were really kind, I thought. You know, I thought with it being the last 9 Inch Nails shows, they probably wouldn't want to have 4 Gary Numan songs. And they probably didn't want to have 4 Gary Numan songs, but nonetheless, they were very kind. And Gemma was there, you know, my wife, who loves 9 Inch Nails, her favourite band, so she's crying and it's all emotional. It's brilliant, actually, absolutely brilliant.
Looking back now at the stuff that he did at the peak and commercial success, I'd never heard anything like that. It really resonated with me. And you know, with the hindsight now, being able to look back, I can see it was a real crossroads for me. You know, really, it changed the way where I was headed musically.
Trent Reznor would talk about listening to Telecon every morning on the way to the studio to make Downward Spiral. And I listen to Downward Spiral because I love it, and I can't hear Telecon in it at all. And yet that would appear to be one of the main influential albums for that particular record.
Telecon had become a favorite that I'd rediscovered. To me, I read it's a very sad, detached record that I've tried to emulate in ways. So when I write a song, I'll tend to conjure up moods. Telecon I'll often call up for a vibe.
Trent Reznor was not alone in his admiration of Gary's work, and as the 90s progressed, a succession of artists from techno to rock to hip-hop would begin to cite Gary as a major influence.
This general renaissance thing started with people talking about me being an influence on them, and it went to people doing cover versions.
Industrial metal band Fear Factory covered Cars in 1998, bringing Gary into the studio to record new vocals and featuring him heavily in the video. Again, Cars shot up the American charts, exposing Gary to a younger generation.
Here in my car, where the image bursts down, will you visit me please, if I open my door in Cars?
Anyone that does a cover version of your song is exposing your music to their fans. You know, a lot of them will hear that song, and some of those perhaps they might like what they hear. So every time that happens, there is a good chance that an element of that particular band's fans will check you out and like it.
Further covers by Beck, Hole, Foo Fighters, Smashing Pumpkins and Marilyn Manson cemented Gary's credentials in the US, whilst an album of covers called Random, featuring the likes of Blur, Moloko and Saint Etienne, did the same in the UK. But the most significant cover was perhaps Nine Inch Nails' version of Metal.
And Trent took the original song and, in a sense, sort of kept true to it. You know, you play the original, you play that one, you know it's the same song, and yet it's just so much better. And there's all this other stuff going on at the end, and you know, it's just, that's what it should be, and that's what a cover version should be.
I did the cover of Metal quite a long time ago, you know, and I'm happy with the version we did, but then I got wind somehow that he liked it, and I think I gave it to him at some show he showed up for at one point before we released it. Well, it was very flattering, you know.
Rock was not the only genre that Gary's music had an influence on, with a whole host of world-renowned dance acts sampling Gary's songs. DJ Armand van Helden got to #1 in the UK with Coochie, a track heavily sampled from Cars. And Cars' iconic riff was to star again in recent hit Hiding All the Stars by British electronic dance act Chicane.
Yeah, well, I'm meeting some guy who says he has the latest thing in pop music.
Basement Jaxx, a London-based house music duo, had a massive hit with Where's Your Head At, which took no less than 2 samples from 2 different Gary Numan songs.
Yeah, the Where's Your Head At song, yeah, God, that was successful. It's a great song as well, and it's really good when somebody takes your music and uses it in another way, but which is also great. You know, there's been a few things that people have done, and it's not really been my cup of tea at all. Not that I'd ever grumble, because I'm flattered that people do it always. I would never sort of criticise anything. There's maybe more after it was #1 when I had it, and here it was on a brand new song. You know, with an entirely new generation of people listening to it, and it still sounded as if it waves things. Have both been, in my opinion, particularly good tracks, and the fact that my music is such a key part of them makes you feel good. You know, I'm proud to have sort of that loose connection with it, really.
But perhaps the most surprising influence was revealed by legendary hip-hop pioneer Afrika Bambaataa, who, having covered Metal himself, confessed that Gary's success in America 30 years ago had contributed to the development of hip-hop.
The influence on hip-hop music, I totally knew nothing about when it was actually happening, which is a shame, actually. I didn't find out about it until a few years ago when somebody said Afrika Bambaataa had talked about me. I met him, we did a joint interview with somebody. Talking to Bambaataa about it, I started to find out how important it had been and how they used to use the drum loops and things and then rap over it.
Even hip-hop veterans, the Beastie Boys, referenced Gary's influence in their 1998 album track Super Disco Breakin'.
It's a very unexpected connection, really, but one I'm actually particularly proud of.
It is astonishing, considering he was a white boy from Heathrow, the influence that he had on American music. But I think that's because his use of electronic sounds was way ahead of its time. And then people came back, and when sampling was invented, people started sampling them left, right and centre.
One of the big reasons that my last 10 or 15 years have been steadily getting better, rather than the previous 15, which was just steadily getting worse. You know, it all goes back to that 94 sort of period, and this is when a lot of these cover versions started to appear, and that coincides with my songwriting changing and in my opinion, getting much, much better. And so when these people did check me out, I had something worthwhile to listen to.
Buoyed by the growing respect for his older work, and with a fresh passion for new material, Gary released Exile in 1997. The album featured the single Dominion Day and marked a return to live performance with an ambitious world tour. But it was with the year 2000 and the release of Pure that Gary received widespread critical acclaim for the first time in his career.
Getting rave reviews for Pure was a massive surprise. I'd always had really bad reviews pretty much throughout my whole career, and I'd stopped even thinking, stopped reading reviews, because if they reviewed it at all, it was always going to be rubbish. So just accepted that was sort of my lot. And then Pure came along, which was probably the heaviest, darkest record that I'd made at that point. And all of a sudden the reviews are fantastic.
This rich vein of form would continue with the 2003 Rico collaboration Crazier, which saw Gary return to the UK Top 20 and even back to the top of the pop studio.
The Crazier thing was just such a cool experience in general, and it peaked really with being back on top of the pops. I think we're the featured artist on top of the pops that week, where they follow you down the corridor and do that stuff. It was great, and it'd been such a long time since I've been on top of the pops, and to get back on it again, and with a song like that, because I thought it was a good song. It wasn't a typical pop song at all. It was much heavier.
Gary's creative reinvigoration was complemented by his burgeoning family life. In 2003, Gary and his wife Gemma had the first of 3 little girls, which saw his creative pace slow somewhat. Later, returning to the studio in 2006 with the album Jagged, featuring the single In a Dark Place.
I'm actually enjoying it more now than I think I ever have, ever. I really love where I am musically, and from the career's in a really lovely place, actually. The respect, I suppose, that I never had when it was, the whole pop star thing was happening. There's plenty of that now, it's people doing cover versions, all that sort of stuff, kind of all the time. So it's sort of quite nice being me at the moment.
Continuing to develop his new musical direction, Gary is now hard at it again in the studio with upcoming album Splinter.
With Splinter, though it's a long way from being finished at the minute, is shaping up to be a heavier, darker, more aggressive, more anthemic, more epic, hopefully, version of Pure and Jagged combined, with all new sounds and so on.
Gary Numan's story has been an amazing roller coaster ride of highs and lows, which has spanned over 30 years, from the early days as a fledgling punk onto a global superstar who struggled to find critical appreciation.
When I became successful, it wasn't because I had some sort of good understanding or feel for where music was and what it needed and all the rest of it. It wasn't like that at all. I stumbled into success, I just happened to come along at the right time, writing the right kind of thing and have the right opportunities at just the right moment.
I think Gary has now got some of the recognition and kudos that he deserved a long time ago.
I was always impressed by the way he'd found his voice, and it's unusual, but it was unmistakably him, and boldly him. I see me doing what I've learned from him.
Gary is fantastically influential in a way that he just has not had credit for.
There's something unsettling in it that I really like. Do you know what I mean? That mix of being a bit intrigued and a bit confused and knowing it's really good, but still feeling a bit, it makes you feel a bit on edge, but in a really good way.
use of electronic sounds was way ahead of its time. I mean, he was one of those artists that created a whole new way of making music.
Gary Numan's legacy is well and truly established, with thousands of adoring fans, 3 #1 albums, and over 10 million albums sold worldwide. You cannot fail to admire the sheer determination and staying power of an artist who has overcome personal, creative, and critical setbacks to become one of the most influential, sampled, and covered artists of all time.
I've never felt part of anything, really. When I started, I knew exactly the sort of music I wanted to make and did. I have a very clear idea of where my own music is and where I want it to go next. I don't have much interest, if any, in whether that's commercially a good place to be taking music on or not.
Gary marches on with over 30 years in the music business. He shows no signs of slowing down as he embraces new technologies and sounds and inspires a whole new generation of musicians. A true electronic pioneer who has stood the test of time and continues to record and innovate.
I get a lot of the credit because I was the first one to become #1. Realistically, it would be fair that all of us that were doing it at that time should sort of take some share, I suppose. I'm just lucky that I was the first.
You see, this means everything to me.